as a competition advocate to really stay close to the organizations and the individuals who are actually making a living in agriculture and food. That gives us, even though we're a DC-based nonprofit, it gives us a lot of really vital information so that we can advocate more effectively. So AAI, the American Antitrust Institute, really does value the role of OCM and other, and Food and Water Watch, with whom we do quite a bit of productive collaboration, and hopefully we'll do more. This is an important part of what we do. So I think in this session, Chris and I want to really stimulate a dialogue and not do sort of a talking heads kind of thing. And I wanted to sort of break down my remarks into four sections. And remember, first and foremost, I am a competition advocate. AAI has been around for about 16 years. We cover food and ag, we cover airlines, telecommunications, energy, you name it. All the big infrastructure industries we cover. So I split my time across a bunch of different areas, and agriculture and food is a really, really important one. If you protect and promote competition, consumers tend to benefit. If competition falls apart, there is no competition because of market power, the exercise of market power, squelching of innovation and new entry by disruptive systems, then consumers suffer. Food and ag is really unique. It's a unique industry in that we have a very disaggregated set of producers in a very large country. And I'll talk about the hourglass supply chain in just a few minutes. Very, very important to protect the ends of the supply chain, the producers, the production segment, and also the consumers. So I'll speak a little bit about that. So what I want to do in this first chunk, first of four major points, is to talk about our two different food systems. Basically what it's boiled down to in the United States and elsewhere is we have a big industrial food system, which we're all sort of painfully familiar with, and we have an encroaching decentralized food system. These are the smaller entrants, the smaller systems at all levels of the supply chain, from production all the way down through manufacturing, processing, manufacturing, even down through distribution to the consumer. And by that I mean farmers market types of venues or distribution channels. So we have two increasingly competing food systems. What we're trying to do, I think, as a collective is to shift the focus from the industrial system to the decentralized system. And, you know, part of the uphill battle here is educated, affluent consumers get it. They understand why it's important to consume through a decentralized system. They have the affluence to do that. But when you're dealing with mainstream America, you're really bucking the basic economics of lower cost industrial food. When I say lower cost, I don't mean higher quality. In many cases, it's lower quality food. But to shift the public perception, to shift the dynamic from industrial to decentralized food, there's really three things I think that we need to do or need to focus on. One is consumer education. We've talked about that a lot already today. You've heard many people speak about that. The second is to promote what I call disruptive innovation. And that's what the Mike Callicrates are all about. That's what other people in this room are all about. And the concept of disruptive innovation is borrowed actually from other industries. We see it in energy. This whole concept of rooftop solar. I'm from Boulder, where everybody seems to have photovoltaics on their roof. But that's disruptive. That challenges the centralized utility-based model of energy distribution. So any small producer, small system, focusing on high quality, regional production, even local production, is what I would call a disruptive innovator. We see it also in telecom. You know, all the edge providers like Netflix, Hulu, all these guys that are over the top, so you don't have to buy your streaming from Comcast. Those guys are disruptive innovators. So we have the same thing going on in food. The third major thing I think we need to shift is to protect competition. And I'll speak more about the role of the antitrust laws and our competition laws later in the conversation. But we need to protect our smaller systems, primarily from large entrenched oligopolies and monopolies that wield a significant amount of market power and often behave in predatory or exclusionary ways. And because we want those systems to be able to thrive and to grow and to get a foothold in the market and to deliver benefits to consumers. And what we also want to do is keep the entry barriers low. So we're talking about systems, smaller systems getting into the market, right? That's one job. And then we're also talking about keeping smaller systems in the market so that they don't fail, that they can continue to expand and to generate benefits for consumers. So let me just recap and then Chris can jump in. We have two basic food systems, in my view, three major efforts that we need to shift this, start creating some shift or tipping in the balance towards decentralized systems. Consumer education, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, if at all. Promoting disruptive innovation, which is a model we've seen in other industries, and then to protect and promote these smaller systems.
I agree with everything you just said, by the way. I think, as a business reporter coming at it, looking at the food economy today, whether it's seeds and genetically engineered seeds controlled by Monsanto and DuPont, or it's the meat industry, everything we've been talking about, you can see this heavy consolidation. And a thing I keep trying to say as a business reporter to the people I talk to is exactly along the lines of what you just said, is we've sort of gotten to this point where the market can't heal itself of the problems that exist, right? There's this tremendous concentration, and yet you've got consumers who are really, really hungry for different kinds of food and food that's produced in a different way. Food, for example, animals that are treated more humanely, animals that are not given antibiotic drugs or hormones, or chickens that are not sprayed with parasitic acid in the slaughterhouse. There's a demand for a different model, and yet what we're seeing time and time again is that there's this dysfunction that prohibits those disruptors from really getting into the business and scaling up to the point where they can reach your basic consumer at the grocery store. And I think that's a really important point to get across to people and for people to understand, because everybody seems to assume that there's this free market, that, Tyson is the biggest meat company because everybody loves their products the most of all in this competitive market, which just isn't the truth at all, as you know. They've just been buying up the other brands, and a few companies have really locked up the access to the market. So, it brings to mind, to me, one quick story, which is that in 2008, there was this real market shock, right, with the financial crisis and the high grain prices. And that was a moment when I think we really should have seen a sort of natural increase in competition as the big stakeholders, the big companies were being rocked. Pilgrim's Pride declared bankruptcy and was bought out by an even bigger firm in JBS. And there was this moment when I would have expected to see maybe new entrants have breathing room in the market. I mean, it was a tough time, but at the same time, there was this ability to kind of get in and take advantage of the tumult. And there were some groups in the poultry industry, these kind of co-ops, in particular led by this co-op out of Hinton, Virginia, which was run by this incredible guy named Sonny Meyerhofer. And Sonny Meyerhofer was going around to these southern poultry plants, these southern poultry towns, and describing to people the benefits of starting new co-ops. And the effort pretty much systematically failed because when it came to the point of getting investors involved or even getting people to participate, everybody realized that they'd be put out of business in a matter of months by Tyson Foods and Pilgrim's Pride and these other firms. They had a stranglehold over the market. So it is a concrete example of a time when we should have seen new entrants, because there's money to be made in this business. And yet, again, the market is at a point where it can't heal itself. The market as it stands can't heal itself. So the big question we have, I think, is the one that you're talking about and studying, which is how do we sort of break this up to make it a healthy market again and bring more competition?
Okay, so that's a perfect segue, Chris, into talking about some of these hurdles. This is not an easy problem to fix. Sometimes I stay awake at night thinking about problems in food. It is such an important segment of our economy. It is an essential commodity for health and human well-being, and we have some major hurdles to overcome. Mostly because of the amount of consolidation and that has already occurred in the food and agriculture sector. So, I like things in threes. It's easy for me to remember. So big hurdles for us to overcome as advocates of a more decentralized system. One is market power. I referenced earlier this hourglass-shaped supply chain. I wish I had a whiteboard or PowerPoints, but I don't. But it's easy to picture. So picture an hourglass. This is really one of the very few supply chains in the American economy that looks like this. So at the very top, you have very disaggregated, numerous producers across the board, ranchers, growers, the whole shoot and match. As you work your way down the supply chain into the processing segment, things start to choke down almost to nothing. In many industries, we're down to maybe 2 or 3 major processors in flour milling, in packing, in poultry. We have we go from this vast array of producers almost immediately down to a chokehold in the production segment. As if that were not bad enough, and I'll go back to some of the mergers that have created this bottleneck. If that were not bad enough, now we're seeing it in food manufacturing. So who remembers the last merger of food manufacturers? It's a quiz now. Who can tell me what the last major food manufacturing merger was?
Cargill.
Yes. Cargill and who?
Somebody else, Continental maybe?
Okay, I think you're referring to maybe flour milling or flour processing. So absolutely, but that's actually one level up in the supply chain. That's processing. That's not manufacturing. That's one step above manufacturing. So behind this gentleman, there was a handout.
Well, I wasn't really clear either. So the last merger or buyout I heard about was Andy's organic.
Okay, all right. And that's true. That was a smaller deal. The last biggest food manufacturing merger was ConAgra buying Ralcorp. So we're talking about branded and private labels. Okay, big merger of food manufacturers. It sailed through the FTC and nobody blinked an eye. So ConAgra and Ralcorp. RALCORP, ConAgra and Ralcorp. So that was that's the food manufacturing segment. We've just now had Tyson's by Hillshire, right? And those are vertically integrated companies, so they have tentacles that spread all the way up into the market for hogs and sows, and all the way down into branded products like Jimmy Dean and Hillshire Farms. So we're really in the middle of this hourglass. Big bottleneck, big chokehold. Just a few processors, just a few packers, just a few flour millers now, based on this recent approval of the ConAgra Cargill Ardent Mills joint venture in flour milling, down to extreme concentration in food manufacturing, and I would take it even another level. The level beyond that is retail grocers, right? So, Albertsons just made a bid for who? Safeway. Okay. The FTC is letting these things, they're going through. No problem. Maybe a few divestitures here, maybe a few divestitures there. Maybe you have to sell a few stores off. In Tyson Hillshire, if we go back up to the processing segment, that merger just went through, and they have to divest some sow production, right? Because of concerns that sow producers would be foreclosed from access to customers in the form of Hillshire. All right, so we got concentration in retail grocers. And then we bottom out into the consumer segment. So it's the hourglass. A lot of producers, huge bottleneck, processing, manufacturing, grocers, and then go down to the consumers, and you have obviously an enormous base of consumers. I would even take it a step further and say that the distribution segment is now at risk. So who's merging in distribution? Cisco and U.S. Foods. Right now at the FTC, they seem to have encountered difficulties at the FTC. And the concern there, of course, is that Cisco and U.S. Foods are the two largest, number one and number two, broadliners in the United States. What's a broadliner? A broadliner is literally all on the truck. One-stop shopping. Everything you need for big restaurant chains, hospitals, universities, any large consumer, everything you need is on that truck in the form of food and food-related supplies. So if that merger goes through, we're essentially going to have a monopoly in broadline food distribution at the national level. So, you know, this hourglass is getting longer and longer with this big bottleneck in the middle. So that's the market power problem, and that's what Chris is alluding to. We really do have a broken system because we have allowed, through a combination of poor antitrust enforcement, lax antitrust enforcement, regulatory problems at the USDA, we have allowed our system to collapse into itself in this hourglass shape. The second problem, the second hurdle, I alluded to 3 hurdles, is this misinformation problem. These are food labeling issues, and there are people in this room who are far more expert at this than I am, so I'm not going to wander into that thicket. But I do want to say a few things, and then Chris can chime in on efficiencies. The major hurdle next to market power is the efficiencies argument, which large food producers, processors, manufacturers, grocers are making when they go in and they try and get merger clearance and negotiate with the DOJ, the Department of Justice, or the Federal Trade Commission. When they go in and promote their merger, they're going to come up with the most powerful efficiencies arguments they can muster. And that includes sort of 2 types of efficiencies. One is just cost savings, right? We're going to be able to cut costs. We're going to lower our marginal costs. We're going to be able to produce for less, big economies of scale, right? Big economies of scope, so we can produce more products for more cheaply than we can produce individual products. We're going to get economies of coordination. So if Tyson buys production levels up, farther up in the supply chain, or if ConAgra, for example, buys another brand or another manufacturing facility downstream, they can better pair up inputs and outputs so that they can coordinate food production more efficiently. These are powerful arguments. If you come into the DOJ or the FTC with a merger that looks bad from a competitive standpoint, meaning it's going to result in likely higher prices, lower output, less quality, less innovation, if you can patch together an efficiencies argument that says that my costs are going to go down, then you know you're almost to first base. You are almost to first base. The other pot of efficiencies that the agencies really pay attention to are what are called consumer benefits. So these aren't necessarily cost reductions, but this is bringing products to market faster, new products to market faster, more products, more product variety, higher quality. Distributing products in ways that they wouldn't be able to do if they didn't merge with another large company. So between the cost savings and the consumer benefits, right, you're really looking at a very steep hill when it comes to getting the agencies, the antitrust agencies, to block these big deals that create this bottleneck in our supply chain. Now, with all due respect to the agencies with whom we have very good relationships, there have been a few examples of mergers that have been conditioned on divestitures and other remedies that I will talk about in just a minute. But before I do that, Chris.
Yeah, okay. I'm thinking a lot as you're sitting here talking about this, and I kind of want to ask you a question about this, and I don't want to make you get ahead of where you are or anything, but when, I think you're really painting a perfect picture of what has happened here, which is that the hourglass is so real, and I don't want to go into it, but I mean, I've seen it firsthand just reporting on this, how the companies in the middle use their position in the middle to do a really simple playbook that's been around for 100 years. They screw producers, and then they turn around and screw consumers. They depress the price they pay for their product, and then they keep the price high or just lower quality for what we're buying on the other end, and then they keep the profits in the middle. I mean, that's been happening for a long, long time. And we've seen this before in the United States, right? Back in the robber baron days at the turn of the century when we first created our first vigorous antitrust laws. And I feel like we solved this problem to a large degree. I mean, you look at the economy in the 50s and 60s, and we didn't have this kind of super top-heavy anti-competitive market that we have today. Definitely in the meat industry, I know that that's the case. And it seemed to me that the biggest problem here is exactly what you described in terms of the federal regulators letting these mergers go through. When Tyson bought Hillshire, it was, I don't know. I'm just kind of amazed that these people can like go out publicly with the audacity to say that this is a good thing for the market and for consumers. I mean, we're down to like these last few giant companies, and then they're buying each other out. And you know, poor Patrick Woodall, who works for Food and Water Watch with Winona Hodder, had to kind of like do Department of Justice's job and like research the market and talk about all the ill effects. He was working around the clock, asking me all these questions about the sound market, and I'm like, Patrick, isn't this kind of what the FTC and Department of Justice should be doing? And he said, no, you know, we have to do it and give this information to them so that they'll even do anything about it. And I think that that report that they submitted is one of the big reasons why you saw the small sow divestiture that happened because of the Tyson-Hillshire merger. It seems to me that the federal regulators who should be policing the market for competition have had this massive change in perspective that you just mentioned, which is that the structure of our economy doesn't matter so much. We can have a really consolidated industry, but as long as the producers can show that they're going to make the product cheaper or they're going to create some efficiencies, we're going to let the consolidation happen. I mean, do you feel like that's an oversimplification of what's going on? Why? Here's my question. Why is it that these mergers, which just seem crazy on the surface of it, why is it that there's the presumption that they are going to just sail through FTC and DOJ? Because that totally seems to be the case.
Yeah, it is. It is actually the case. And that really is the million-dollar question for the food and agriculture industry. Why are these mergers being allowed through? Why? And you know, I mean, that may sound like a really naive question, but it's actually a really troubling one. And I think there's two answers. There are two answers for that. Merger analysis at the agencies is driven by a very mechanistic approach. So, you know, the parties come in, they make their case. If the agencies decide to investigate, they will go out and interview market participants. They'll interview buyers, they'll interview competitors, big rivals, small rivals, customers. You know, in Sysco US Foods, the FTC has gone out and talked to a lot of buyers of products of Sysco and US Foods. They've talked to big restaurant chains. They've talked to smaller food systems, smaller producers who want to be able to distribute their higher quality, innovative products, but would probably be unable to do so if they now face this behemoth merged Sysco US Foods. So the agencies will go out and they'll talk to people. They'll look for complainers. First and foremost, unfortunately, the agencies don't tend to listen to consumer advocates. And it really is a tragedy. Consumer advocate, the voice of a consumer advocate will never carry the day, or rarely carry the day in a merger case. The agencies are going to listen to competitors complain about how a merger would disadvantage them, would push them out of the market, would prevent other smaller competitors from getting in. So the voice of competition plays very, very loudly in the whole antitrust enforcement process. So in some regards, it's a very mechanistic process. We have a whole set of merger guidelines. We calculate market shares and market concentration. We look at efficiencies. We do all this sort of mechanistic stuff, coupled up with a lot of anecdotal evidence from the market itself. But at the end of the day, really what you have is this balancing act between anti-competitive effects and efficiencies. If a merger is anti-competitive, but it can be shown that costs will go down because of scale, scope, and coordination, then there's a chance that merger might go through. Now, increasingly, the courts are interested in seeing those cost savings pass through to the consumer. All right, so yeah, let's see some lower prices. Let's actually see prices go down as a result of these efficiencies that you're claiming. That's not a requirement, though. That is absolutely not a requirement. So we have some court opinions that say that that's a good thing and we'd like to see that. That's not a requirement. That's not in the law, that cost savings have to be passed on onto consumers. So there's this problem of a mechanistic approach. And what we've been doing as competition advocates is telling the agencies that food is different. It's just different. It's more than just price. It's more than quality. It's more than just P&Q, as we say in economics. It's about safety, right? It's about preventing outbreaks of contaminated food, which I think are on the rise, but there may be people in here who know more about that than I do. It's about having a stable food supply chain that has redundancy built into it so that we don't have just two processors of flour. We don't just have two packers. We don't just have two major food manufacturers. If one of those were to fail, then the whole supply chain collapses. So we'd be in a situation where our national food system, our supply chain, would be really open to attack from the outside, and we won't even talk about stuff like bioterrorism and all that kind of thing, which is, I think, an increasingly alarming risk. So when you have a bottlenecked supply chain like what we have, that's not a stable supply chain. It's not redundant, it's not diverse, it doesn't have any protections built into it that in the event of catastrophe, whether it's an internal upheaval or some shock from the outside, that's not a supply chain that's going to weather the storm. And that's why we need competition and we need the diversity in the supply chain. Antitrust law doesn't account for those factors. It's all about price and quantity. That's it. Price is going to go up. Is quantity going to go down? That's really what it's all about. It's not about quality. It's not about stability. It's not about redundancy or diversity or any of the things that are unique and important to the food system. So when it comes to advocating, everyone in this room needs to take up that mantra of telling antitrust enforcers at the state and the national level, the federal level, that those factors should factor in to antitrust analysis. And then finally, the other response to Chris's point is we have disarray on the enforcement side. So I don't know how many people are familiar with how mergers are reviewed, but we have two agencies, two federal agencies. The Department of Justice looks at all mergers in the production segment, right? So they looked at the flour milling merger. They looked at Tyson-Hilscher. They handled the JBS merger back in 2008. So anything in the production down through sort of the processing segment, that's DOJ. Those are all the mergers that they review. The FTC comes in halfway down the supply chain and takes the rest of it. So the FTC will handle all the food manufacturing mergers. So the FTC handled ConAgra Ralcorp, right? FTC is looking at Cisco US Foods, that's all in distribution. And the FTC handles all the grocery mergers. So you have two separate agencies splitting this supply chain in half. And never the twain shall meet. DOJ's doing all this, FTC's doing all this down there. We want to know where the communication is. This is a supply chain. This is not half a supply chain, and then the other half of the supply chain. This is one big supply chain. It's an integrated, critically integrated supply chain that needs to be protected, and competition needs to be promoted within all levels. The agencies, one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. We've encouraged them to coordinate. We've encouraged them to collaborate. We've encouraged them to share personnel who work on the ag and food cases. I don't know to what extent that's happening, but that's a big problem.
Yeah, it is. I want to say, even within the meat industry, it's subdivided between Department of Justice and USDA. It's the most dysfunctional system. I would just love to be a meat monopolist right now. It's just you're on the right side of the system. So my question to you is, this does seem to me really broken. The bias seems to be on the side of mergers, and it really frustrates me, by the way, how the financial press, when it's announced that Tyson's going to buy Hillshire, they're going to say Tyson just bought Hillshire. And then there'll be this little sentence, 3 paragraphs in, that says, pending some regulatory approval. But there's always this bias that the merger is going to go through and the regulatory approval is a rubber stamp. So you've been studying this for a long time. You've been really involved in this in a long time. How can we possibly reinvigorate an antitrust regime in this country that could deal with our existing problem? And what I mean to say is the bottleneck is very, very real in the food system right now. Is there any way that it can be done to unwind the massive concentration that's there now? As a side note, I would like to say, all due respect to everybody involved in the food system, I don't think the solution can come alone from the entrepreneurial local food system that is kind of thriving in the shadow of these massive concentrated corporations. I might be wrong, I hope I'm wrong, but I think the massive corporations need to be dealt with. How could we possibly reinvigorate our antitrust regime to unwind the concentration that is there today?
I wish I had a better answer to that. we have what I am increasingly, depressingly calling, have hit the wall on consolidation in many of our key industries. We've hit the wall in ag and food, meaning we can't take anymore. We can't tolerate any more concentration, any more consolidation. I mean, we'll have monopolies in key segments of our food supply chain. Or oligopolies, just tight cartels of firms. We've certainly done that in airlines. We can't tolerate any more consolidation in airlines. We have 4 big carriers now. What else can we handle? Fares have gone up, seats have gone down, flight frequency has been cut. The head of the DOJ, the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, Bill Baer, who's a great guy, smart guy, and has been very activist. They attempted to block the U.S. Airways American merger. They had a great case. If you want a really good example of a strong government complaint against a merger, go read that complaint. It is really, really good. What did we end up with? That merger went through with some slot divestitures at DCA. We can't tolerate any more consolidation in airlines. We can't tolerate any more consolidation in wireless telecom, right? Who's gonna buy who before we have a duopoly, just 2 firms left or 3 firms left? So unfortunately, we've hit the wall in many of these key industries. All right, so answers to the question, what to do? Well, one is to encourage vigorous antitrust enforcement. Get the DOJ and the FTC to work together so they can get their eyeballs on the whole supply chain instead of just part of the supply chain. All right, that's number one. Number 2 is let's invigorate, so we have vigorous merger enforcement, but let's invigorate Section 2. So Section 2 of the Sherman Act, as many of you know, is the anti-monopolization statute. It is there to prevent firms from maintaining or leveraging their monopolies. Remember, it's not a crime. It's not illegal in the U.S. to be a monopolist. If you were smarter, better, lower cost, you had better resources, you were just faster and better than your competitors, then you can have a monopoly. And we've seen it in Microsoft, we've seen it in Google with online search, we've seen it all over the place. Not illegal to be a monopolist. If it was illegal to be a monopolist, we wouldn't have any entrepreneurship, we wouldn't have any risk-taking, we wouldn't have any profits that would be generated back into R&D and innovation. But if you use your monopoly to extend it or leverage it to another level, that's potential. That's when we start getting crosswise with the antitrust laws. So these big food companies that engage in exclusionary conduct, pushing out smaller rivals, making it hard for them to compete, engaging in predatory practices, squeezing farmers to death so that they don't receive prices that are compensatory, or even enable them to make a living. All of that type of behavior, that exclusionary conduct, can be challenged, potentially under Section 2. Those cases are hard to bring, I'd be hard-pressed sitting here right now to come up with the last successful Section 2 case of antitrust enforcement in the U.S. That's the federal level. Agitate with the state AGs. The states are very active, as you know, in agriculture and food. They get very involved. They get very, pissed off when these mergers come through because their local economies are going to be, heavily impacted by these mergers. So we get a lot of states interested in these mergers, the grocery mergers, the distribution. So agitate at the state level. All right, and promote enforcement of Section 2. And I would say of Section 1. Section 1 is our anti-conspiracy statute. So, the fertilizer cartel, where farmers are paying incredibly inflated prices for fertilizers, for potash, for phosphorus. Those cases can be easier to bring. And those are there, those statutes are there to promote competition and potentially could help us unwind some of this consolidation that we've seen.
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'd like to bore in on that a little bit because I think it's really, really important. We're talking about the Sherman Act here, which is like the Magna Carta of antitrust law in the United States, I think, right?
Yes.
More or less. And it's this really, really simple law with 2 parts. Part 1 outlaws collusion, more or less. It's saying, my dad was an antitrust guy, and he said the rule of thumb is that it takes 2 people to violate Section 1 and 1 person to violate Section 2, right? So Section 1 is collusion, and then Section 2, which I think is one of the most important and interesting parts, Section 2 is to prevent monopolistic abuses. Because like you say, monopolies are okay. Apple had a monopoly on the tablet market for a while because they got in first and did it best, and that's great. but you can't abuse your monopolistic position. That's when it gets illegal, and that's when we need antitrust enforcement. I'm wondering, I've always heard this, that Section 2 cases are the hardest to try. And yet, to me, it seems like the most important in the environment we're in today, because now we've got these big monopolies. And it's the Section 2 violations that are the most important. It's these companies squeezing ranchers, it's these companies pushing out new entrants, it's Amazon screwing over one of the most important labor forces in the whole country, which is authors. I mean, they're very important people, if I can say. That was a joke, by the way. Nobody cares about the poor authors. I just want to throw that out. Authors don't have conferences like
That's
this.
because authors aren't vocal enough.
Oh yeah, I guess
So
that's the
they need to
case.
start complaining more.
Yeah.
They need to merge.
We need our OCM. Yeah, authors need to merge. So my question to you is, why is it so hard to try Section 2 cases? Why is it so hard to litigate against monopolistic abuses? And do you see any means by which we could improve it? I don't know if it's going to be revigorating the Sherman Act or what we could do.
The reason why it's so hard to successfully mount a Section 2 case in this country, and by the way, Microsoft was a Section 2 case, right? That was our last big Section 2 case. How many years ago was that? That was Microsoft using its monopoly in the operating system to, who remembers? To do what? Who did they push out of the market?
Netscape.
Netscape. So back when the browsers were just being developed, Netscape was in there, and they got a foothold. They had about 25% of the browser market. Well, Microsoft came in with Explorer, right? And you know, within 2 years, Netscape's market share, I think, went from 75% to 25%. So based on Microsoft's bad behavior, their exclusive contracts, bundling of the operating system with the browser, going to the original equipment manufacturers and saying, hey, if you keep Netscape off of your equipment, then we'll cut you a sweet deal. All that exclusionary conduct got Microsoft a really sweet deal from the government, which was not divestiture of, which is what it should have been, wasn't divestiture of business units from Microsoft, but it was a bunch of sort of behavioral conditions. Oh, you got to do this. Let's donate some computers to California school children. We promised not to do that. Europe went after Microsoft with a pitchfork. Like, they didn't get off so easily in Europe. That was our last successful Section 2 case. And the reason why they're so hard to prosecute is you have to show that the company engaging in that bad conduct, that exclusionary conduct, has a monopoly. And that in itself is very difficult. Do you do that with market shares? Do you do it with data? Do you look at their profit margins? But there are all sorts of tools and metrics that we can use to sort of show that there is a monopoly. Then you have to show that they willfully use their monopoly position to disadvantage their competitors. That's a tall order, a very, very tall order. So you got lawyers on the other side, defense attorneys, who are going to be picking away every single argument, economic analysis, legal argument that you put forward that would promote a Section 2 case. And then finally, it's back to the sufficiencies issues. If you can sell a judge and a jury on the fact that your conduct was justified based on business practices, business justifications, it promoted quality, for example. You were better able to maintain quality control because you could oversee the use of inputs all the way through the production process through to the output stage. If you can make quality control arguments, if you can make cost reduction arguments, all of those things will play heavily in your favor if you are defending, in the position of defending a Section 2 case. So it's a really tough battle. The best thing to do, of course, is to prevent this from happening in the first place. But as Chris points out very aptly, we're already in the boat. The train has left the station. We already have this bottleneck supply chain. So what do we do to unwind it? And I think what it's going to take is some very vocal consumers, always, but some very vocal smaller competitors. Because, as I said earlier, when the agencies go out and they interview and subpoena market participants in these merger cases and these cartel cases and Section 1 cases, they will listen to rivals, they will listen to competitors. And those folks have to come forward without fear of retaliation and intimidation. That's what's keeping a lot of folks down in food and agriculture is the fear of retaliation. Chris and I have done a lot of work on Monsanto. You know, talk about retaliation. You know, talk about policing what you're planting on your farm. Talk about no seed saving. Talk about all the things that Monsanto has implemented over the years to keep rivals, consumers, producers quiet. That intimidation, retaliation factor plays hugely into the voice of the smaller competitor staying quiet. But that's what the government needs to hear.
Well, to that point, Monsanto, right, in my layman's opinion, is just like a Section 2 case just begging to be brought. I mean, monopolistic abuses across the board. The monopoly seems indisputable when their genes are in some 95% of all the corn plants in the United States, I think, or neighborhood of 80% of all the soybeans in the United States. Drawing me to my next question, you know, in 2010, the Department of Justice launched this massive investigation into Monsanto. I mean, it was big, and they were working on it. They were interviewing people throughout corn country. I mean, I would think that they would have ample evidence for a case that I would also consider low-hanging fruit for a Microsoft-type lawsuit. And yet, I'm going to say around 2012, Department of Justice just dropped the case. And they never said why. They just said it was over, the investigation was over, the investigation was sealed, and I mean, it died with a whimper, which I think brings us to the political element in a lot of this. It seems obvious to me that there's a real reticence to pick antitrust fights on the part of our lawmakers. I mean, it's not a kind of issue that you can run on for some reason, and I don't know if we just need the pain to get a lot better before a politician feels like they can run on this issue. I mean, David Dahmen is out in Nebraska trying to run on this right now, and you know, I think that because he's a Democrat in Nebraska, that's just going to play against him, to be blunt. But he's, you know, we're seeing some people try to bring this up. My question to you is, if we're going to reinvigorate antitrust enforcement in the United States, I see two things that need to happen. First of all, we need leaders, like Teddy Roosevelt-type leaders, who will actually stand up and advocate for this and say that it's good for Americans, it's good for our economy. But secondly, so I'd call that the leadership role. But secondly, it seems like we might have a legislative role. I think that our antitrust law is corrupted in the sense that it has just been so bogged down and chipped away at and layered with massive bureaucracy that it's just ineffective now. And we need to have some kind of brush clearing or reform to bring these laws up to date. Do you see it that way? I mean, which do you think is more important? If you could just wave a magic wand, what would you like to see most of all happen to kind of reinvigorate our antitrust law today?
Right, so I actually am of the view that our antitrust laws, and they're old, I mean, you know, these laws are over 100 years old, or one is actually, they're both over 100 years old. Those laws, you know, it's almost like the Constitution. It was written with such foresight, you know, eons ago, that they have endured, and they are still able to, when enforced, that's the key, to deliver the goods in terms of protecting competition and ultimately consumers. So I don't think we need necessarily to overhaul the antitrust laws. I think we need to enforce the antitrust laws. And by the way, the other antitrust law that doesn't get so much press is Section 5 of the FTC Act. So Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act is way more flexible than Section 2. And we're pushing this now hard. If nobody wants to enforce Section 2, or Section 2 cases are going to fall apart because they're so difficult to put together, then let's go with Section 5 of the FTC Act. That prohibits unfair methods of competition. That's the gist of Section 5. So any exclusionary conduct designed to predatory conduct, you know, pushing rivals out of the market, making it hard for them to get access to inputs or to distribution channels. All of that is handleable under Section 5. And what we need is a leadership in Washington and in the states that's going to promote the use of Section 5 and of Section 2. You know, Chris alluded earlier to this Monsanto investigation. They investigated for 2 years, and, you know, we got nothing. We got a press release that was like a paragraph long saying they've closed the investigation. No reasons given, absolutely nothing that would give the public any insight or transparency into what they were looking for. That is owed to the American public. That some summary, some insight, some transparency is owed to the American public, to the American producer, as to why that antitrust investigation was closed. And it was unceremoniously closed. We'll never know what happened unless you know the insiders at the DOJ. So I think the laws are there. We need leadership that's going to enforce the laws. And what happened with the USDA, US DOJ ag workshops, remember the big rollout, the 5 workshops throughout the US? We got a 10-page summary of what happened there. And that's it. We got nothing else from that. And we were hoping for more.
That really pisses me off. A lot of people here were at those workshops.
They were.
And I think everybody remembers the feeling of what was happening in Ankeny, this first workshop. I mean, there was this kind of real electricity in the air. That's a cliche, but I think people felt like something was really going to happen from that. And it's almost more dispiriting that all that energy was pumped into something and then it ended in exactly the kind of retreat you just described, a sort of silent acquiescence, complete lack of action, and a complete lack of explanation why. I mean, I don't feel like even with those workshops there was any sort of justification for why no action was going to be taken. And I know for a fact that, Tom Vilsack just changed his political tune overnight. I mean, you had these quotes from Ankeny, Iowa, talking about all his worries about the rural economy, and then by 2011, it was clear that the agricultural economy had become a campaign prop for Obama. That, hey, here's one part of the economy that's doing great, and it was under our stewardship. I think one of the biggest mistakes at Ankeny, I remember the press conference afterwards where you had Christine Varney, who was then head of antitrust enforcement, and you had Eric Holder. I don't know if I got her title right, but she was the main antitrust person at DOJ. And then Eric Holder. And I remember asking them, are you considering breaking up these companies? And Christine Varney said, oh, no, we're not looking at that, that's not on the table, but we might look at this or that or the other thing. And I think that was such a mistake to start the process already halfway down the field at the 50-yard line,
Right.
And say we're not going to look at extreme or extraordinary remedies to this problem. And they sort of already negotiated themselves into minor actions anyway. My question to you, as someone who has really studied this a lot and been involved with it, why do you think antitrust enforcement is such I'm just going to have to say like a political loser? I mean, you don't see many politicians running on it, and yet it's a body of law that is pro-capitalism, pro-market, pro-consumer, pro-producer. The only thing it's anti is monopoly. I mean, how is that like a losing political pitch that we're going to take on monopolies? Why do you think we're not seeing more people run on this and more people really advocate for it in Washington?
Well, Chris is right. Antitrust law is one of the smallest areas of law, which is really a contradiction in terms. It is the bastion of support for our free market system. And when I talk to opponents of antitrust law, I mean, there's some people out there who think we should abolish the antitrust laws. But let's not underestimate the power of the opposition out here. That some people think that the pace of technology, the serial monopoly phenomenon, which is, Microsoft's only going to have their monopoly for a few years before the next greatest idea comes in and uproots Microsoft with another monopoly. So you don't need those antitrust laws. The market will take care of itself. We don't get a free market system and all the benefits that flow from that, which is really based on the pillars of a democratic society. We don't get that without having some traffic cop out there, making sure that competition is fair. And it's on the merits, because we know that big firms will use market power. It's in their every incentive to use market power, right? It's profit maximizing. Of course they're going to exercise market power. So we need that set of rules in place. The problem with antitrust law is the size of corporations, consolidation in the economy has created huge pockets of political power. And I'm not going to downplay the intimidation factor, right? I mean, right now in Comcast, Time Warner Cable, those two are going to want to merge. We're doing everything we can to fight that. The General Counsel for the Federal Communications Commission just put out a press release a couple of weeks ago saying, we want people to come in. If you come in, your names will not be divulged. We do not want people not coming in because they fear retaliation. So here we have the head of a regulatory agency making a broadcast announcement to America that they want people coming in to tell their stories, and they are expressly committing to protect their privacy so that they will not suffer retaliation. If we've gotten to that stage in the economy where that level of intimidation and retaliation is there, then we got real problems with political power. And it's not only in telecom, it's everywhere. And you guys know, because you've been on the receiving end of that stick, that intimidation stick, for years now.
Okay, what I want to do is ask a couple of questions of my own, and then I want to open it up for some questions. One of the things globally, American competition, and this applies to all aspects, and I'll mention Smithfield Foods in that context. Because we signed these World Trade Organization deals, what big business giveth, big business has to take. And labor laws in the United States are in shambles, but foreign nations are saying, hey, we can't do business with you because you're not respecting the minimum rights of labor, that kind of thing. Antitrust, I see that going on now in China, where they're pretty rapacious on what they want to do globally as far as resource procurement and Smithfield Foods and so forth. But within China, they seem to be putting a rein on all business. The financial software saying, wait a minute, we don't want you to be more powerful than our government. We don't want to be dependent upon that. Auto parts, the aftermarket, China's cracking down. The banking services, they're cracking down. Do you think that global actions will force some kind of backing down on American antitrust efforts?
You mean less enforcement, Tim, right?
I'm saying, will it increase enforcement, or will they say this? Well, we're competing globally.
No.
Of course, it's okay to take Smithfield over,
Right.
But we can't take over a Chinese pork producer.
I actually think the whole, this may sound really heretical, I think the whole global thing is completely overblown right now. We're seeing pullback on a number of fronts. Everyone's pulling their outsourcing out of Asia, and where are they putting it? They're taking it to Mexico. The Mexicans are easier to deal with, there's less of a culture barrier. Oh boy, it was more expensive than we thought, all those transportation costs to get components back from Asia. The whole outsourcing thing is taking on a very different profile now. Now that wage rates are going up in China and in India, so things are, the wage balance is changing, it's now becoming more expensive to outsource over there. So we're pulling stuff back in, so that's one thing. The second thing, if China wants to enforce its anti-monopoly law, and by the way, what Tim is referring to is a direct outgrowth of China having an anti-monopoly law on the books now. It was passed in 2007, 2008. Now China's decided they're going to use their anti-monopoly law basically as a protectionist mechanism to protect their local producers, their state-owned enterprises, et cetera, et cetera. If they can play the game that way. They can want to be a global trader and be in the global mix, but then they're going to use their anti-monopoly law as a protectionist mechanism. Okay, well, the U.S. can play that game too, right? We can start pulling our stuff back, and right now the economics of it are pulling outsourcing back to this part of the globe. Wage rates are going to force it back to the United States anyway in many different industries. But I think what the big hook is here, especially in food, the globalization of food, is really the quality issues. We may not need antitrust as a hook to bring our stuff back home. Like, there was no antitrust hook into the Smithfield acquisition. The Chinese didn't compete with us anywhere, so there was no overlap. There was no elimination of competition. It was purely a foreign firm taking over a U.S. firm. But if you look at quality standards, events of toxicity and contamination in China, that, to me, is the major channel to the consumer. That's how you fight off that kind of thing, is by educating consumers about food products being manufactured outside the United States, and quality issues, labeling issues, all these kinds of things.
And let me ask another question. I apologize because the subject just fascinates me. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is a corporation ostensibly used to promote the export of agricultural goods from the United States. They were kind of soundly kicked out of El Salvador because they wanted to make a trade package where El Salvador would be forced to take Monsanto's seeds and Monsanto's products. Why is the U.S. government being an arm of Monsanto and encouraging global monopolization of GMOs and glyphosate or Roundup?
Right, so,
That's a Chris question.
well, I mean, the government's always been an arm of Monsanto in terms of foreign trade, right? And I mean, I guess the State Department kind of has some justification in that, like one of their mandates is to help promote American business. But, I mean, so that's all, that is continuing with a long-held pattern to help push the interests of U.S. corporations overseas, I guess is what I'd say.
Are there more questions up here? Oh, good. Janina, I'm gonna...
I bet you the mic.
I saw whenever I asked my questions, you kind of dozed off, you know. And
Well, while we're waiting on questions, let me just make one more remark about the fertilizer cartel. Like, you know, we got a fertilizer cartel, people. You know, we have potassium, potash, and we have phosphorus, nitrogen, not so much. But all that cartel stuff is immunized under the Webb-Pomerant Act of 1918. It was designed originally to protect smaller American producers so they could compete more effectively against big foreign producers of fertilizers. It's been on the books for almost 100 years now. So what do we have? Well, we have a potash cartel. You know, we got the Russians involved. We've got potash up in Saskatchewan. We've got U.S. producers involved, and we've got high prices for fertilizer and effectively a cartel that the FTC refuses to prosecute. They refuse to prosecute it because they're afraid of the immunity under the Webb-Pomerant Act. So a lot of this global trade, these global competition issues are distorted by a lot of these old immunities and exemptions that we have for companies.
all right, let's Janine.
In recent last couple of years, there have been a couple of cases in the southeast and in the northeast where the Department of Justice has looked into the actions of proprietary dairy plant and a large dairy cooperative. Producers filed a class action lawsuit. I understand that now they're in the process of making some financial payments to those producers, along with agreeing to either stop doing some things or start doing some things that haven't been done in the past. My question is, does justice or does anybody follow up on this, or does the whole thing just go away as long as they paid the money?
I think the value of those cases, and you're actually raising a really, really important point here, and I'll just a couple of comments on that. Those cases go down in the books. So they create a body of case law, a body of precedent that can easily be harnessed the next time something like that comes up. We are, you know, Chris was saying, well, how can we combat this? How can we battle this? The other big channel, of course, is to rely on the private bar. You rely on private antitrust lawsuits to deal with some of this bad behavior. We got a really, really, really good decision in the Min Chem case. That this involves potash and price fixing for potash. It was it wasn't a huge settlement. It was like $110 million, but it's progress. It's progress. The Justice Department is amping up the fines and the fee and the penalties for cartel type behavior. So the private bar can achieve can make a lot of progress. If the government won't do it, then let's have the private bar bring these cases, these class action cases, and we're getting better decisions out of those, especially in food and agriculture. So that's, you know, and we have some very good plaintiffs' attorneys in the United States who are very, very good at prosecuting these cases.
We have another question up here.
We just had the 20th anniversary of NAFTA, and we saw that a lot of environmental regs kind of went by the wayside, and it certainly was devastating for the farmers in Chiapas. So I'm wondering what you all think about TPP and TAFTA and the prospects there about we've seen even more environmental regs go by the wayside as we enter into these international agreements.
You know, I gotta admit, that's, I have not been following the that very closely, but I will say just broadly, to kind of talk to your antitrust question, I mean, I've never seen a global trade agreement like that actually bolster, regulation efforts, whether it be environmental or antitrust in the U.S. I think what we can probably expect is just even more flattening out of our regime against, regulatory regime against foreign ones. But you probably have better stuff to say about that.
Yeah, I think the whole free trade thing, especially with friendly neighbors, is a horse trading game, right? So you want, this side wants some benefits here, so you give up a little bit on the environmental regulation or on other stuff. I think that will remain a horse trading exercise. Although, I have to say it is a little surprising given how aggressively the U.S. is pursuing environmental regulation in general, that we would give up too much ground on stuff like that. But, negotiations are at their core a horse trading exercise. And it's hard to say. And again, the involvement of stakeholder groups and politically entrenched groups is going to make a difference in how those things turn out. I wish I was more of an expert on that, but unfortunately I'm not.
Well, let me give you a quick Colorado story about these trade agreements. And remember, we used to have a senator here, Senator Hank Brown. And whenever NAFTA first came into effect around 1992 or so, or perhaps it was the World Trade Organization, and the Senate passed it, and Ralph Nader challenged everyone in the Senate to say, what did you pass? Are you willing to take a test for what's in this bill? And all of them refused across the country except for Hank Brown. And he studied, and he took the test in front of the cameras with Ralph Nader. And he passed, he got 100, and he goes, oh my God, had I known what was in it, I would have never voted for it. True story. And I talked with him about it years later, and he says, I'm not so concerned about the trade, but he said, I was more concerned about our lack of sovereignty. We were unable to manage our own affairs. So as it ties to the environmental issues, what happens now with something like TPP is that we subjugate our environmental laws to global things. If we pass an environmental law which is a little bit stricter, suppose here in Colorado Springs we want to have fewer pesticides as an example, and it raises the cost of business. Well, then these international corporations can make Colorado Springs pay for the additional costs. So it's kind of a frightening scenario which is unfolding before us. So, I'm plugged into that, and it's going to have huge repercussions for antitrust issues for agriculture and so forth. So I'm glad you're tuned in on that one. Is there another question up here? Because I'd like to ask one more, please.
It's on. So I'm a little new to this conversation, so curiosity question. If nothing would change, are companies really going to get too big to fail, or are they going to rot from the inside? Because it's really kind of a philosophical question, right? I have this thing about size. I had to deal with School District 20 here at one point, and my personal take is when bureaucracy about an organization becomes more important than what they're really about, you have a problem. So in your experience, in your studies, and you know a lot more about that, have you ever, maybe on a country level, but maybe on a company level, encountered that they truly became a monopoly and then it just rotted from the inside out, and then you have an opportunity for entrepreneurs in the grassroots level to, reemerge and build something anew. So can you say something to that?
Yeah, that's really a good question. And that kind of loops back to this discussion we were having earlier about efficiencies, how large merger proposals will be really buttressed by all of these efficiencies claims, right? Cost savings, economies of scale, economies of coordination between different levels, economies of scope, new better products, faster to market, the whole shoot and match. What we're seeing is that with very large companies, there are actually those efficiencies don't pan out. So I can tell you that there are many economic studies now out there. I'm speaking as an economist There are many academic studies out there that show that mergers don't prove up the benefits. So you would think that the antitrust agencies would be paying attention to this, right? You'd think, wow, they're keeping track of this economic literature, they're keeping track of anecdotal evidence about how these companies are performing, and they're going, when they look at the next merger that comes through, that's going to sort of temper their view of these efficiencies claims that companies come in with. That train is just leaving the station, and we're trying to get as many people on it as we can, right? So now there's more effort to monitor how companies perform after they merge in terms of prices, in terms of quality, and in food, you know what I think the Alamo in food is going to be contamination. I think it's going to be the larger companies, huge amounts of consolidation. They simply cannot keep quality control working to an acceptable standard for the American public. That's assuming the American public has a quality control standard. I think that is deteriorating. But I think that's what it's going to be in food and agriculture. It's going to be the safety and the quality issues. It's going to be part of the supply chain failing because we don't have enough producers in bottlenecked segments. Once we have a few Alamos, once we get the agencies to pay attention to this really good evidence that mergers don't prove up the benefits, once we can show that companies get too large and managers can't manage them, you know, I mean, managers are human beings, right? I mean, they only have so much, you can get the smartest manager, the best manager on the planet. They can't manage an incredibly large, complex company. And we're starting to push against the boundaries of what managers can do. And there was a really good McKinsey study on this back in 2004 that showed that, you know, that all these cost benefits, all these consumer benefits, revenue benefits that companies targeted when they wanted to merge, very few of them were ever realized. So we are capitalizing on this now, and everybody needs to get on this train to start putting together a coherent story about why large is actually bad for not only for competition, but for the companies themselves, right? I mean, the shareholders, you would think, would be complaining about this, and consumers themselves. So I think the time is right now to start, you know, harnessing this data, these arguments for why large companies don't do well.
Can I jump in on that? Because I think that is such a great question, and I'd like to share a little bit of my thoughts on it too. I really do agree with everything you say, and what really piqued my interest is when you talked about shareholders. I mentioned earlier that, you know, Christine Varney and Eric Holder in the federal government were not bold enough to put on the table breaking up the companies. But the people who have been bold enough to suggest that are hedge fund managers. There was a big push to break apart Smithfield Foods, the vertically integrated hog and pork company, and it was coming from these activist investors because they saw exactly what you're talking about, that, you know, the efficiencies of growth only last to a certain point, and then you grow beyond the benefits of it, and that's where we are today. But my answer to your question is, I think these firms do get giant to the point where they start rotting from within, but they don't collapse. And that's the monopoly problem. They outlive the usefulness because they have so much market power that keeps them alive, you know, like giant zombies roaming the countryside and destroying cities. I just have to throw that out to, like, I'm terrified. Invigorate a little bit. I'm kidding though, but the problem is with market power, the size outlives its use and efficiency, and they keep going, and that's why you need this sort of public policy response to the problem once you have consolidation at this level. And again, I think we saw this before 100 years ago, where these firms became so large that they were deleterious to the markets, to producers, to consumers, but we still needed antitrust enforcers to get in there and try to solve the situation, because left on its own, a monopoly will not simply dissolve as it probably should, and you know, let new competitors come in.
And just one more thought on that. You know, the U.S. food system is the decentralized food, the smaller producers, smaller systems. It's never going to displace the industrial food system. I mean, let's face it, that's never going to happen. The country's too big. There are too many consumers. There are too many medium to low-income consumers who are shopping at Walmart and purchasing contaminated beef for that ever to happen. But what can happen is the balance can shift, and the role of the disruptive innovator is really going to be key. So don't underestimate the power of the disruptive innovator. I mean, we see it in telecom. T-Mobile, I mean, one reason why the government blocked they didn't block it, they didn't get to that point, but the merger between AT&T and T-Mobile, that merger failed because T-Mobile was a disruptive innovator, right? I mean, look at them. They're offering free international texting. None of the other ones have even thought about doing that yet. They're so entrenched and happy with their market power. The role of the disruptive innovator to constantly be sort of snapping at the heels of the larger producers is going to be key moving forward. It will never displace the industrial food system, but it will certainly, we can certainly do a lot to sort of even out the balance.
And I might offer the Colorado Springs public market would be a disruptive innovator. It's going to challenge and provide another food outlet. So, Diana Moss, American Antitrust Institute. I'm sorry.
Hey Tim.
Yes.
I just put up this letter on the website for folks to look at. This is an example of a competitor complaint to FTC, and if you scroll up or scroll down, you can see some of the body of that. And I'm just highlighting Cisco's really bad behavior in the marketplace. And so this is an example, I think, of what works. I was interviewed by the FTC, and they seemed very interested. I haven't heard from them since, but it's a really big problem for the competitors when you get a monopolist like this, even bigger through another merger. Thanks.
Yeah, this is a really good example that Mike has put up. The agencies need to hear from smaller competitors, and they need to be protected from any sort of retaliation. Here's our worst fear in Cisco US Foods is that the FTC is going to view this as sort of a regional merger. They're going to look at overlaps in distribution centers, food distribution centers that Cisco and US Foods have in different regions of the country, and they're going to come to some agreement that they're going to have to divest distribution systems, distribution warehouses, for example. In my view, that would be a really bad outcome. That's what happens. That's what happened in the flour milling merger, the ConAgra-Cargill merger. So now we have two firms with almost 40% of U.S. flour milling capacity, right? And we have three firms with more than 50% of U.S. flour milling capacity. If the FTC and the DOJ keep looking at these mergers on a regional basis, that's what's creating this creeping consolidation, creeping concentration in the industry. What we need to do is get the FTC and the DOJ, in appropriate cases, to look at this as a national food system, right? To say, no, if you eliminate Cisco or US Foods as part of a merger, you are really going to a merger to a monopoly at the national level. So our food system is now even more bottlenecked, right? It's even more fragile. It's even less stable and less redundant and less diverse than it was before the merger. The only way to get that message through, that whole stability supply chain message through, is for the agencies to look at some of these deals on a national level, not a regional level. Because any sort of regional problem they can fix. They can just require a divestiture of a grocery store, a distribution center, a mill, whatever. They can do that. And that will not get us anywhere. In fact, it will get us more into the boat that Chris has been describing over here.
Well, I want to thank Diana Moss of the American Antitrust Institute. I believe it's antitrustinstitute.org.
Yes.
Follow it. It's got all this stuff in there. It's really good. I really admire the work. Chris Leonard's with the New America Foundation. He's got his book out there for sale, The Meat Racket. I encourage you to pick up that book. There were some things that we didn't get to discuss, and that was the producer control over the big meat packers' control over the producers, and how we were talking about it earlier, Bill and Judy. We were talking about how it's driven Americans out of the management of the chicken processing or supplying, and then Hispanics, and it continues to go down. And I think the most recent trend is for Laotians to take over the food production for chickens, babysit the chickens essentially, and even they're getting out of it because of the inequities between the major. Just get the book. It's an extraordinary book, and it'll give you insights that will change the way you think about the meat industry. Diana Moss, Chris Leonard, thanks so much.
Thank you.